I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today, we talk about families in recovery and the science of parenting. Substance use can disrupt a family, often reaching across generations. Families and the connections of caregivers have a powerful capacity to build on a foundation of resilience. Mackenzie Johnson from Iowa State University joins us to talk about parenting while in recovery from substance use. She's authored a podcast, The Science of Parenting, and studies the issues related to adversity and resilience for families in recovery. Mackenzie, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here today.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Peter. What an introduction, boy. I hope I can live up to the credibility. But I'm Mackenzie Johnson. I am as Peter said, I'm a professional. I've spent about 10 years working in the area of family life education with Iowa State University Extension Outreach, where I got to do the podcast on the science of parenting. We always say we look at the research and reality. So that's kind of my passion. I'm also a doctoral student. So again, looking at the research, if you're getting the vibe there, kind of a dork, kind of here for that nerdy stuff. But yeah, looking at the science, what does the research tell us about what helps our kids? What's maybe harmful for our kids? Where is the research not clear yet? Because there's those places too. And so how do we look at that alongside the realities that families face? I'm also a parent myself. I have 2 young kids. I have loved ones in recovery. I have some personal connections to these topics. And yeah, as a parent myself, that's part of the reason I want to know the geeky stuff. I'm like, okay, we did a podcast season on money, and I'm like, tell me about allowance. What should I do? What should I not do? And it ends up the research was kind of like, well, it's unclear. And so sometimes issues are like that. But fortunately, when it comes to recovery, there's a lot of research around what we can do to help our kids and our families be resilient.
Well, you're sort of a lifelong learner because you worked for Iowa State Extension for a while, and then you decided to refocus yourself on something you learned was really important to you, the science of parenting, let's call it that. Mm-hmm. And you went back to work on your doctorate. That's sort of an immersion into a lifestyle change that can be challenging. How does it feel for you?
I've been working slowly. I got my master's a few years ago, and then I've just kind of taken a class a year to keep my skills fresh. And then, now I'm diving all the way back in. I live in Northwest Iowa, and I drive to campus for class once a week, and it's good. We talked on the podcast about family routines a lot, and it throws off the routine. You have to find a whole new way to do things, but it's been a good thing, and I'm really enjoying, getting the chance to dig in an intentional way to the things I'm passionate about. Sometimes it's thinking about it like, oh, I wonder if this is the case, or, what does research tell us about that? And so this gives me kind of the structure to dive in with intention, to make sure that we are sharing like the most trustworthy and up-to-date information.
Yeah, one of the reasons we'd love to have you here today is to talk about some of the skills and strategies that young parents can use. But before we get there, let's put ourselves in the spot of understanding how sort of big is this problem in Iowa? What are the needs? How many people are living in households with someone in recovery? And what is sort of the socioeconomic breakdown of these people of need?
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't done a lot of looking at the statistics. I'll tell you some of the things I do know. I know that in the US, nearly 9 million kids live with a parent or have lived with a parent who has substance use disorder. And that there tends to be this generational cycle, right? So maybe your parents were using substances and now you use substances. So we tend to see that pattern over time. And a lot of times what we see, I like to highlight in the reality, right? There can be good, bad, and ugly. And sometimes that reality for a child and for a parent when there's substance use involved can involve things related to instability, right? It's hard to provide structure and routine when we're fighting addiction. We a lot of times see trauma, right? That could be in the form of child maltreatment, but also domestic violence. The person who maybe is utilizing substances is experiencing violence in their home. And so there's a lot of things that are kind of mixed into this reality that are difficult, but there's also aspects of hope. Something that the Public Science Collaborative did a few years back, they did these interviews with people who were either actively using substances or were in recovery from addiction. And so they did 40 interviews, like long interviews, is this impressive project. And I got to read through some of those transcripts and prep for this season. And amongst some of those, right, like nitty gritty, difficult, like dark pieces, there were also pieces of hope, right? Parents telling stories about the ways they tried to protect their kids in the ways they knew how. People talking about I want to do better for my kids. That sometimes people even talking about substances allow me to care for my kids because I can stay awake longer after working a long shift. And so that sometimes substance use was actually a coping mechanism for a trauma or difficult things they'd been through. And so it was their way of trying to find a way forward so they could parent their kids. And so I think it's a complex thing, but I see, especially in those interviews and other work, you see a mix of challenges, but also ways that parents are resilient.
Wow, that's really interesting. I like to get into that little relationship between what you do and parents and the health and welfare of children. We're going to take a short break and we're going to continue our conversation with Mackenzie Johnson right afterwards. See you all then.
The black truck? Hey, Christina from accounting.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, I used to date a girl named Christina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then she dumped me for my best friend. You want to see some photos of them that I took?
I don't.
I thought we talked about this, buddy.
Buzz and overshared again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna call a car.
That's a smart idea.
So yeah, I know, that's why I did it.
Hey, you're gonna get back to the top of the mountain.
Does that mean I'm gonna get back with Christina?
No.
Oh.
No.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At Mediacom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared. And you can be certain we'll keep your world connected. Every second, 127 new devices connect to the internet. You can feel it happening, our digital world expanding with every breath. We're entering a whole new era of connectivity, and Mediacom will be ready to power it with one of the nation's first 10G platforms. We'll be bringing you more speed, more capacity, more security, and the power to do more than you ever dreamed possible.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking with Mackenzie Johnson from Iowa State University about her research on parenting and recovery and some of her work with the Public Science Collaborative at ISU. Mackenzie, tell us about some of this interesting stuff.
Well, I gotta say, I feel like I'm riding coattails a little bit. Dr. Cass Dorius, Dr. Sean Dorius, directors at Public Science Collaborative, have done a lot of incredible work related to substance use recovery. And so I recently joined the team, actually about a year ago. And so a lot of the projects that they've done, I just feel like I'm benefiting from. And so they've done a ton of work here at the Public Science Collaborative related to substance use recovery alongside the state of Iowa, particularly the Department of Health and Human Services, where they've really been working, in direct partnership with the state to help build the infrastructure for recovery in Iowa. So Iowa was one of the last, is and has been one of the last few states in the nation to have formalized legal code for substance use recovery. There was some for prevention, some for treatment, and Iowa was one of the last 5 states. But that changed in the last few years, now that Iowa is focusing in on recovery a little bit. And so we now have our first set of recovery community centers in Iowa, which Public Science Collaborative was integral in helping kind of establish. And then part of my role has been to help provide support to those recovery community centers. So a lot of great stuff happening in the state of Iowa, in part with partnership with the state and just great work Public Science Collaborative gets to do.
When I listened to your podcasts, which are really cool, now how did that come about?
So actually, when I started with Public Science Collaborative, I was doing a dual role between Public Science Collaborative and Iowa State Extension. And so we'd been doing that podcast. I mean, we had 11 seasons of content at the time. And as I started digging into this recovery work, which I really started doing within the last year, that there was just this obvious gap on the specific needs for parents in recovery and what our podcast had traditionally shared. There were a lot of things from the podcast that would be relevant to parents in recovery, but they weren't always described in ways where maybe parents in recovery would feel seen or feel included. And so, as we kind of talked about how we support recovery community centers, one of the things they were saying is they have parents that come into their centers that could maybe use some resources or information. And so it was this beautiful collaboration out of the two. And so we developed a podcast season specifically thinking about parents in recovery, kind of on the theme of parenting through challenges. And this idea of resilience.
Now, is parenting in recovery for the average Iowan may be dealing with this? Is it a single parent situation, dual parent situation, caregiver situation? What's it like?
It really covers the gamut. There's not one kind of specific experience. We do see one of our podcast episodes, it talks about custody and kinship care and things like that. So that is kind of a common experience for people in recovery. They may have a family member provide temporary care for their child while they attend treatment, or maybe they lose custody of their children due to concerns of maybe neglect or things. And so that is kind of a common experience to maybe have some, I don't want to say issues, some things related to custody, but it's not that everybody's a single parent or everybody is in a marriage. One trend we do sometimes see is that what in the literature we call like early partnering. And early child rearing. So, maybe having children younger than kind of the typical, like the rest of the kind of average of normal parents become, or not normal, the average person maybe becomes parents. And so that sometimes affects kind of the child rearing and custody situation too.
Yeah, I caught you catching yourself about the word normal.
Yeah.
That's one of
an advocate, never who's normal, who defines that anyway.
And the fact is it's such a wide spectrum.
It is.
The whole idea is that what may not seem normal to a person on one side is normal to the other, and that life is so much about where people are, not where you are.
Yes.
I may be someplace, but it's also valid where somebody else is, and I shouldn't judge them based on where I am. Now, when you get into these situations, do you see, it seems to me that recovery, especially from things like alcohol, would span socioeconomic barriers. So it's not just poor people, it's everybody that has a situation where they're actually living with some state of recovery in the household.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is not a given that, someone maybe with lower socioeconomic status are the only people who are in recovery. Recovery spans a lot. And, it's so many personal characteristics, not even just related to income, right? Related to race and, where you live and all of these things. And there are certainly kind of trends or pockets within that, but overall, it's not fair to say that like this specific population is the population for substance use. I also want to comment. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, if we look at the stats, 85% of people using substances are employed.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just like you and me.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I want to comment also, go back to what we were saying about the word normal. I didn't mean to bring it up, but here I am. I think something that's interesting about the parenting research alongside substance use research is, right, this idea of generational patterns, right? Which we touched on earlier. But so when you think about normal, what normal looks like to you, normal parenting, normal, right? Like your typical day. If you grew up with a parent who used substances, normal to you might be substance use. Or if you grew up with a parent who was not around very often, right, in terms of like providing emotional support or even providing for your physical needs, normal for you is that style of parenting. And so I often use the phrase with people that not everybody had the privilege of a good model for parenting or a healthy model. And so that normal varies from person to person.
Boy, amen to that. We're going to take a short break, and afterwards, we're going to continue our conversation about parenting and recovery, and maybe, if Mackenzie's willing, talk about the 4 key things that are integral to hope and feeling for a hope sort of filled family experience and recovery, something that brings the positivism out of this experience. See you all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At Mediacom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared, and you can be certain we'll keep your world connected.
Multiple studies have shown that marijuana can slow both driver reaction and response time, which can be really dangerous. He's here. He's here. Wait. Why? I can't drive. Why? I'm high. Oh.
Every second, 127 new devices connect to the internet. You can feel it happening, our digital world expanding with every breath. We're entering a whole new era of connectivity, and MediaCom will be ready to power it with one of the nation's first 10G platforms. We'll be bringing you more speed, more capacity, more security, and the power to do more than you ever dreamed possible.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking with Mackenzie Johnson about parenting, resilience, healing, and hope for families in recovery, and good ideas for all families in general. Mackenzie, this idea of the key aspects of a family structure, can you share that with us?
Yes. So in our podcast season, we dug into a couple different topics, and we love to share, as I said before, research and reality. So we maybe bring in a tidbit of research, but then talk about how it really applies in the lives of parents. And so one of the strategies that we brought in is from a book called The Power of Showing Up by Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, a well-respected book in the parenting science. And they have something called the 4 S's of good enough parenting. And I love a framework, a concrete way to break something down. I'm all about that.
Okay, tell us what they are.
Yes. So the 4 S's of good enough parenting, right? Within the context, they talk about how important it is just to show up for our kids. And so sometimes we set that bar too high. And that can create shame and other problems for families. And so what is good enough? And so they say the 4 S's of good enough parenting are helping kids feel safe, helping kids feel seen, helping kids feel soothed, and helping kids feel secure. So breaking those down a little. So safe, how do we help kids feel safe? This can be emotional safety, right? That there's not going to be negative consequences if they're having a hard time. Also physical safety. And so when we think about parents in recovery who maybe have had experience with domestic violence, right? How do we help our kids be safe when we are facing obstacles like that? Or maybe we currently live in a not very safe neighborhood, and right now we can't afford to change that. And so how do we create safety when we are facing maybe particular challenges to it? Then also think about how we help our kids feel seen. Some of my favorite words when we describe parenting, I don't really like to use good and bad. I prefer words like attentive or active. And so helping our kids feel seen can be about being attentive to them. What's going on with them? What are their interests? What happens in their daily life? Just finding little moments of connection for those. Then soothed, also when they're having hard times, that we are there to help offer support. Not even necessarily that we can fix it for them, but that, again, they can feel seen, but also they have support in it. And then finally, secure, that they can be so confident in our relationship and connection with them, that they know we're going to care for them, that we're going to show up for them. And so, yeah, those are those 4, helping kids feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. Those are the 4 S's of good enough parenting.
What's really nice is they have a real strong grounding in emotions and feelings. And for children, that's a language in and of itself. Well, for adults too, but we sometimes think our brains are smarter than our hearts. And now, so when you're working with these programs, at what age do children become cognizant enough of this so that you can actually talk to kids about some of these things?
That's a good question. And emotional development is complex. So, right, our babies exhibit emotion, right? They're communicating emotion when they're communicating their needs, right? Cries, laughter, those things. I would say in the toddler age, we can kind of get into some of the labeling of feeling, helping kids say like, ooh, I see you're stomping your feet and furrowing your eyebrows or bringing your eyebrows on. You might be mad. Or, oh, I can hear in your voice that you seem really sad about this. So kind of those simple labels of language. And then into preschool, I would say we can get more into how we appropriately express those things. That's an important part of emotion. And you're mad. what are we going to do about that? It's okay to feel mad. Or do we need to stomp our feet? My son is 4, and sometimes I let him yell his mad out. I'm like, let's step out the front door. Or even if you have good energy, like excited energy, yell your mad out, yell your excited out, and he will give it a good screech. But teaching our kids the appropriate ways to do that. But even into the teen years, we're still teaching our kids about appropriate emotional expression and coping with uncomfortable feelings.
Now, are these good strategies for parents when they know there's a household where recovery is happening?
Absolutely, for parents in recovery and for any parents. I think that's one of my main takeaways from the season was there are kind of unique circumstances within recovery, but there's also a lot of universal parenting challenges that happen. And so you're like, in some ways you're unique, but you're also not alone. And so there's a lot of strategies for kind of parenting in general that are still valuable and I always like to say, can add to your toolbox. Not that you need to use every tool every day, or maybe a tool I love, you don't. That's okay. We add them into the toolbox and maybe we never touch one, but then at least if we ever need it, it's there that we can reach for it.
Now, I know you work with people in recovery. One of your podcasts has a guest willing to share what they were going through. What are you learning as Mackenzie? You grew up in a household where you had to deal with this. Mm-hmm. What are some of the new things in the short time we have left in this segment that you learned that sort of surprised you?
Oh boy. Yeah, Courtney Hammond was our co-host from Cedar Rapids Recovery Community Center, and she shared so openly, authentically, vulnerably. Learned so much from her. Yeah, I grew up with a parent who was in recovery, and I understood some of the like head knowledge. I think the biggest takeaway for me is really taking some of that heart knowledge of kind of that, like, a deeper understanding and empathy of some of the specific experiences and the stories that I feel like my parent often protected me from, which in a lot of ways was a good thing. But so I'm seeing kind of a different side of it. And so I've definitely gained a lot of empathy, not that I didn't before, but gained more empathy and understanding maybe of those experiences.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and afterwards, Mackenzie's going to share some comments, insights, and inspiration with all of us. See you all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
Every second, 127 new devices connect to the internet. You can feel it happening, our digital world expanding with every breath. We're entering a whole new era of connectivity, and MediaCom will be ready to power it with one of the nation's first 10G platforms. We'll be bringing you more speed, more capacity, more security, and the power to do more than you ever dreamed possible. Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At MediaCom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared, and you can be certain we'll keep your world connected.
Welcome back. Today on Surviving Bad, we're talking about families in recovery and the science of parenting. Let's see what insights and inspirations our guest, Mackenzie Johnson, has to share. Mackenzie, bring on the hope.
All right. Well, one of the things I am so glad we get the chance to talk about is often when we think about substance use, have pictures of active addiction, right? Maybe you have personal experience with yourself or a loved one in active addiction. But I think one of the reasons I'm so drawn to families in recovery is the amount of hope. So when we understand, yes, substance use is complicated and, even life-threatening, but recovery is possible, that there's hope in those things, that being in addiction doesn't mean we're in addiction forever necessarily. And so understanding that recovery is possible and there's hope for it, and that often families in recovery, they've experienced that hope, right? This life-changing difference in their lives to now be in recovery versus in addiction. And so, there's so much hope here in this space. And you step into any of the recovery community centers in Iowa, you're going to feel it.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's the whole idea of the stigma, the fear, and the insecurity. The fact is that if you can say, I'm in recovery, you are in a beautiful place.
Yes.
That is a
Yes.
wonderful starting point for the rest of your life.
And for so long, I mean, necessarily people in recovery needed to felt the need to be anonymous, often because of discrimination. Like bad things could happen if people knew you used to be addicted to something. And now we're to this place where people can put a more positive face on recovery and say, I'm in recovery. I've done this incredible thing. I've been through this amazing journey. Look at me now. And that's a great thing for advocates and helping people see the realities of it.
I was with a friend not long ago who was, I would classify as from our early days in college, a burnout. He would say the same thing. And he says, my recovery started really slow. It was every day after a party. I would struggle with this. And I didn't realize till years later when I actually went through treatment and recovery that, oh my God, it's exactly the same thing. The question is whether you get on the bus or off the bus. Once you get moving forward and you would invest in it, it's such a positive outcome, and you don't have to just do this like Groundhog Day, start over every single day you make a mistake. You can now build your whole life around the solution.
Yes.
When you're doing these podcasts and you're reaching out to people, what are you hearing from people about what they're gaining and feeling from that experience?
For the parents in recovery saying it's nice to be seen and have some of my experiences represented, that helps me not feel as alone. For people who maybe don't have personal experience with this, which I would actually say is probably in the minority, most people know somebody who has struggled with substance use. For them, it's the understanding, kind of that gaining of empathy of I never understood it that way. Or, why this is so hopeful or so incredible. And I think that's one of the things we can help change by telling these stories is reducing the stigma by this exists. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the opportunities within it. And that's a good thing.
And then that's the one fascinating thing about the world we live in today. We are connecting more ways with more people. And this is one of the positive attributes of technology, things like your podcast and connecting. How do you feel about that?
Grateful and humbled. It's a great opportunity. And for people to be willing to share their stories and experience means everything.
Well, listen, I thank you for what you do and all the great work you're doing. Keep it up. We look forward to maybe some updates in the future on some of the new stuff you're working on. And thank you all for watching today. Check out our website, ahealthyiowa.org, and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. I'm MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.